I love to read. There were so many great books this year, but I have to say the one that I enjoyed the most was The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. That book really takes a basic concept and says, just by applying small increments every day, you can become a superstar. You can do whatever you want. He focuses on things that are easy to do, but says they're easy not to do as well. And what I really liked was the concept about you're doing these small things and you don't see it today or tomorrow or the next day, but it's like compound interest. And one day you wake up and you're either on the path of success or on the path of failure. So it's about focusing on the tiny little things that you don't feel like doing to make tremendous change. And I think that applies to everybody in life in every walk.
Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a CPA podcast presented by the Heshi's CPA Knowledge Center. The center is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the chartered professional accountant profession in Alberta. For the record, this CPA podcast isn't about bean counting. Our episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics. Hello, I'm Gordon Turtle, and on this episode of Uncommon Sense, we'll hear from someone directly involved in the growing trend of converting office space and office buildings into residential housing. Heather Weir, CPA, is the Vice President of the Astra Group of Companies, as well as Chief Financial Officer for one of Astra's companies, People First Developments. In addition to being a chartered professional accountant, Heather also holds a Chartered Business Valuator designation. She has over 25 years of management experience, acting in both financial and operational capacities for companies with diversified domestic and international business operations. Heather's extensive experience has translated into key strengths when leading complex international projects, process design, internal controls implementation, fraud detection, and business valuations. In recent years, Astra and People First have focused on projects to convert office space into residential housing in Calgary. This trend has been getting a lot of attention in the past few years as cities across Canada have placed an emphasis on revitalizing their downtown cores. Heather and the Astra team have been on the front line of this work in Calgary, and Heather has joined us to talk about what has been achieved in this area and the motivations behind it. Thanks for being here, Heather.
Well, thank you for having me, Gordon. I love your show. It's great to see accountants in a light that isn't just bean counters. So I'm really happy that we can do this together and spread the word.
Well, thanks, Heather. And that's exactly what we're going for with the podcast. So it's good to hear. Before we get into the topic of office space conversion, can you talk a bit about your CPA career path and how that led to your current role with a company that is a leader in this type of work?
Yes, that's actually a really interesting story. I spent most of my career in oil and gas, in accounting type roles, evaluations, and then I moved over into engineering and operations and working on projects. And while I was on projects, I discovered I really love these things. I love trying to help people process improvements. How do we do things better? And that Kaizen continuous improvement methodology. And in fact, I loved it so much that I decided to leave the company I was with and start consulting. And I did that quite a while in oil and gas. And then I one day opened the email and I saw this opportunity for a development company as the controller. And I thought, wow, this would be really an exciting place to be. And I promptly applied for it. And then I was turned down because I didn't have the experience. So I thought, well, it's not the time. And I kind of put it in my back pocket. And I just kept thinking about it on and off, but not too seriously. And then back in 2018, I was doing some consulting work with my neighbors, and Astra actually hired me to write a banking proposal to get funding. And that worked out well, and it was just one thing led to another, and more things came up. And then about a couple years ago, I was asked to come on full-time in the role of CFO, and the rest is history. And so I really thought that the evolution here was kind of cool because, you think you put something out there and maybe it's not happening today, but, it kind of comes into fruition at some time.
Now, that's an interesting story, and I guess it just goes to show that, timing is everything, and as you say, one thing leads to another. So thanks for that review of your background. How did your company first get involved in the area of converting office space into residential housing? What factors, whether internal or external, influenced the company's decision to go in this direction in Calgary?
Well, this was really a perfect evolution for us over time. When Maxim Olszewski started Astra in 2014, the company was focused on apartment building renovations and did a lot of work for insurance companies. And when Maxim was doing that, he realized a large component of that was demolition and abatement. And so he went and got the company certified for that, and then just kept doing that work and getting better and better at it, learning how to do it. And then at some point, we realized that we have all the skills to do this ourselves. So we started purchasing smaller apartment buildings, 12 to 16 units that were run down or condemned or underutilized, and buildings that were really causing issues in neighborhoods. And so it was the first time we really thought about, wow, we can really make a difference in communities, because when we were bringing these buildings up to par, it really changed the whole atmosphere of the area. And instead of being an eyesore in a place that made people afraid, it was providing housing. And so when the city announced this program, it was just a natural fit. We already had all the skills to do all the internal renovations, all the process down. How do we make this work? And we already knew about all the benefits to the community. And so it just was made for us.
Well, that's interesting, because it goes to show that the work you're doing is more than just, a simple business proposition. There's a strong element of social and civic responsibility to the work your company is doing. Can you speak about that a bit and your company's commitment to the larger community that is reflected in your work?
Yes, that is definitely a fair statement. We look at every single project as more than just a business proposition. We work closely with the City of Calgary in their initiatives, and we have three main pillars: affordability, accessibility, and energy efficiency. For instance, in energy efficiency, we try to target to get gold certified through Greenbuilt, and that means that we have greenhouse gas reduction of greater than 25% versus the NECB 2017 baseline. We also have significant landfill diversion efforts, and we are doing a lot of embodied carbon savings on our current project, Petrofino. We estimate about 16,000 tons will be diverted.
Wow.
I know, it's so exciting, right?
Yeah.
With affordability, a significant portion of our units in every building are offered below median rent, and we work with many different agencies in a partnership capacity to place people in the units that need to be there the most. With accessibility, it's increasingly important, and every project varies, but for example, in our current project, Petrofina, we have 15 units that demonstrate universal design, and the building itself is 100% visitable environment per the CSA standards.
Well, that's fantastic. It's great to hear that your company is focusing on those areas that are so important from a perspective other than strictly business and economics. I want to drill down a bit into the conversion process now. To begin, how do you find the buildings you're going to convert, and what are the characteristics of a building or space that make it appropriate for conversion from office to residential?
That is a great question. We target underutilized and distressed Class B and C office towers, and in general, those buildings are in areas where there's some residential and amenities close by. So it makes sense to convert them and not change the purpose of a neighborhood, but to bring up the standard and vitality. And we're working in the west end of downtown right now, and all of our projects are close to train lines, libraries, restaurants, schools, and lots of amenities.
Is there a desired size of building, like 3 stories or 10 stories, or does that matter?
The ones we've done so far are, I would say, around 10 to 18, I think the one is, or it could be 16, but basically enough to have quite a few floors of residential that really make sense to do the project.
Okay, and are the buildings you convert made into like 100% residential units, or are they a mix of residential, business, and retail, or does it depend on the building?
All of our buildings contain both residential and some retail and amenities space on the first and second floor. And many of our buildings, we incorporate a co-working type of space. For example, in our Cornerstone project on the second floor, we have a co-working beauty space so that it allows people to be able to both live and work in the building and really bring in that foot traffic and vitality into the neighborhood.
Oh, that's cool. I like to hear that. Is that blend of housing and retail important, do you think, to the long-term success of conversions? Or could you get by with just strict residential units, do you think?
I think it's very important. It really not only provides convenience to the tenants, but, when you get people in the space and in order to create community, you really need things to do, places to go. And it also helps businesses. People can start their small business. They can service the neighborhood, and it really creates that sense of community that maybe we've lost in big cities like we had in the past.
Yeah, and do you find that there's a lot of interest among small business people and retailers to set up in your buildings?
We actually do. We started this model back in 2020 in our first building. We bought that 2 weeks before COVID shut down, and part of that building was 18,000 square feet of business space, and we renovated it in sections because obviously the times were changing and people were uncertain about what they needed or wanted, and they still had to run their business. So we went on month-to-month leases, and many of those tenants are still there today because our model allows people to grow their business as they need without that commitment and fear of, I'm going to do something and I can never, get out of it.
Oh, that's great. So I understand that all of the residential units that you've converted are rental units. So I got a two-part question here for you. Can you talk about the different types and shapes of your units, and are there unique challenges that arise when you convert office space into apartments?
We focus on mainly 2 and 3 bedroom apartments so far. There's a serious lack of that kind of space in Calgary, especially 3 bedroom apartments so that we can service families. We try to have as large a floor plate as possible in every building so that there is room for people and families to live. One thing that you have to keep in mind with the buildings that you're targeting is it can't be too large of a floor plate, or else you end up having units that look like bowling alleys because they have to be long and narrow so that everybody can have a window and access to the external. But so far, we've been really fortunate to find buildings that we can work with and that bode well to be able to put that residential in. In the first project we had, we actually did inverted decks so that everybody could have that open space and it doesn't look like an old office tower. It actually looks like new residential.
Wow. Sometimes I'm trying to visualize how that works. I haven't actually seen any of your buildings, but, you think of an office building with a bunch of little offices and maybe cubicles and all that kind of stuff. Just changing that to apartments, it must take a bit of a visionary person to figure out how to go from an office layout to apartment layout. So do you have designers and architects who work for you, or is it pretty much a set pattern that you use?
Yes, we do. We have a designer in-house as well as an architect, and we do a significant amount of planning up front to make sure that we're maximizing the use of the building systems and what's going to be comfortable for tenants and how it could look aesthetically pleasing and make the best use of the space before we even start with permitting or construction.
So do you think if a person were to walk in after the conversion's complete, they would even know that it had ever been an office building from the inside?
I don't think so. I mean, when we look at our cornerstone building, especially with the decks, I don't think you would ever know that. And we basically use the existing frame and then we gut it and it's all redesigned and it's really a nice looking building, if I do say so.
Oh, wow, that's so cool. Are the conversion projects you work on located solely in the downtown area of Calgary? And if so, why?
Yes, right now we're working in the west end of downtown, and that's in alignment with the City of Calgary initiative. But not only just the alignment there, that's where most of the Class B and C office towers are located, so it makes perfect sense. And we found that really putting all these projects in a consolidated area really increases the overall impact to the neighborhoods and the area.
Okay. Can you talk about the success of your projects in meeting housing needs in Calgary? I know, like most other Canadian cities, there has been a housing crunch because of growth in populations. And has it been difficult to find tenants for your new homes?
Well, our first project was leased up in approximately 3 months, and I think that goes to a number of factors. Canada is net positive on immigration, and particularly in Calgary, people coming from many areas of Canada to live, work here, go to school here. And also, all of these projects are in a central location that's close to amenities, train lines, school, many things. So we did not have any issues leasing up our building.
So that sounds like you don't have any trouble finding tenants once the building's ready for people to move in.
Yes, that's exactly right. We had long lists of people waiting to review the building before we even had occupancy available. And it was really exciting. And it's wonderful to see all the families coming and being able to live there and start a new life.
That is fantastic. Do you have to do a lot of marketing, or is it just sort of word of mouth that leads to that interest and waiting list?
Well, we do both. We did some marketing, and the City of Calgary was very excited to work with us as this was the first project of its kind under the program. So that received quite a bit of attention. And we also had, of course, word of mouth and some of the great agencies that we work with to place people in the affordable units, of course, are looking at that and spreading the word. So it was a combination of many things. And we also have a great internal marketing team.
Oh, okay. How do you think your company's work in Calgary is contributing to the revitalization of the downtown?
Well, I think Astra is a small part of the overall initiative. The concept that Calgary initiated is groundbreaking. Not only does it solve a need here in Calgary, but it's the same situation across North America. COVID really changed the face of how businesses operate, and the Calgary Downtown Incentive Team figured out, what are we going to do about this? Because they saw a need, many housing apartments needed, and also all of these buildings standing vacant. So they made a decision and they put this program in place. To date, there's been many companies and all levels of government coming to see how they're doing the program. Cities like San Francisco, Toronto, Washington, Edmonton, Vancouver, to name just a few. And this topic in general was a hot topic at the Canadian Apartment Investment Conference in Toronto that I was at this summer. And as far as Astra, I think that we're contributing to this overall big picture because we are leading by example, and people have been coming to tour our buildings and see the program in action and ask questions and find out ways to take ideas home and put them into action. For example, our first building cornerstone was standing vacant for approximately a decade. And when we've gone out and done recent stakeholder engagement, we found that 67% of local businesses surveyed reported improved street safety. Nearly half of all the businesses saw an increase in traffic directly attributable to the completion of the cornerstone. and the community vibrancy increased with 89% of businesses expressing greater satisfaction with the area's vitality. And all of these stats really speak to this is working, and people are wanting to do it and take the ideas back to their own cities.
So obviously the impact has been overwhelmingly positive, which is great to hear. But has the company encountered any skepticism or community complaints about the work you've been doing?
Well, I would say overall there's been mostly positive comments. We're transforming mostly vacant buildings into something that adds safety, vitality, and new destinations while boosting the local business traffic. We've had a lot of feedback from residents, businesses, organizations in the neighborhood, and they've been very positive and wanting to see how they can be involved and really on board. So I think there hasn't been very many obstacles at all.
Well, that's good to hear. I understand that your company has worked with the City of Calgary on some conversion projects. Have you found the city government and administration to be supportive of your work, or has there been a lot of frustrating red tape from the city?
Oh, I think the city has done an excellent job in cutting through the red tape to make these projects a reality. They even created a group to assist, that they have combined the building and development permits together to make it a much smoother process. And all the way through these projects, or our first project, every time we had something come up or we wanted to discuss, they've always been there for us, to talk to us, to walk through things so we could figure out how to do this together and make things better.
Well, that's good to know. You've kind of talked about this already, but obviously with different people from different cities coming to Calgary to see what you're doing, there is an interest across North America, it sounds like. So can you talk a bit more about whether the trend of office to residential conversion is catching on in other cities in Alberta and across Canada?
Yes. So at the conference, there were multiple speakers, including from large financial institutions. And what was really fascinating to me is the large banks were starting to say, conversions are mainstream. This is going to carry on. The amount of waste diverted from landfills by reusing the existing structure and making conscious efforts to donate and recycle materials has a profound environmental impact. All this leads to greater sustainability for our planet, not to mention the jobs created, the increase in safety, the increase in community vibrancy. And the bottom line is that it's a general consensus at that conference that this is a no-brainer.
So, Heather, do you think your company might look to doing projects in cities other than Calgary, maybe expanding, say, to Edmonton, for example, or even elsewhere in Canada, or are you going to stick to Calgary?
I think there's a lot of inventory still in Calgary, and I know that there's some great developers in Edmonton and other places. So at this point in time, I don't believe that we have any plans to expand, but never say never.
Yeah, for sure. I was wondering, I'm guessing there's a finite number of buildings in Calgary that could be converted, but you mentioned there's still a large inventory available for future projects. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say for at least the next 5 to 10 years, there's a lot of inventory. And with the continued lack of housing, it really doesn't matter if it's conversions or greenbelt. Construction is going to play a large role in meeting the housing needs.
You hear about office buildings that are maybe at 40% vacancy or 50% vacancy, since the pandemic and with more people working from home and that kind of thing. So do you think there's a possibility there might be buildings where they maintain, say, 50% office space and the other 50% of the building becomes residential? Is that something you might be looking at,
Well, I'm not sure what other companies are doing, but I have read that there are some companies that are looking to do some of those things. And I think the mixed use is really a good thing. And if we have businesses in buildings that are 40 to 50% vacant in Class B and C office towers, it only makes sense for them to move to Class A office towers and fill up those buildings, and it's more economically viable for everyone.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just one final question for you today, Heather. What do you think is the future of office to residential conversions in Calgary and the rest of Alberta? Do you think it's a long-lasting part of urban housing, or is it more of a short-term trend?
I think that we're looking at least 5 to 10 years of moving forward in this capacity, and then we'll see. But the way the economy is going, I think it isn't a short-term trend. The benefits are quantifiable. It's a great solution to the lack of housing and vacant properties. And one thing that might not be that obvious is that when old office towers are standing vacant and not upgraded to current code, they still have to keep the power on. And without the conversion, there's a lot more emissions occurring. And at some point, if nothing is done with them, they will have to be demolished and end up in the landfill. So really, it's a win-win on many, many levels.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our discussion today, Heather. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your expertise and experience with us today. I've been hearing so much in recent years about office to residential conversions, so it's very interesting to learn more about how that trend is playing out in reality in Calgary. So thank you again, and thank you to you and your colleagues for the great work you're doing in Calgary.
Thank you, Gordon. We're excited to give back to the community, and I think it's leading a new way and a new thought of how people want to sustain our planet.
The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center was created through a generous donation to the CPA Education Foundation by the late Brian Heshe. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. His generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. The opinions expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the CPA Education Foundation. We would like to acknowledge that the CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments on the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.